Pretty much classic July weather, looking at warmth and humidity and just small rain chances on the way.
A little after 1 p.m. on the 28th of July 2007, police officers and paramedics were called to a third-floor apartment in Rockaway, Queens, and found 55-year-old Eric Goodridge on the floor. He was handcuffed. His mouth was stuffed with a towel secured by duct tape. The police checked for a pulse. There was none. He was dead. At first, the officers couldn't figure out how he died, but they soon realized something was missing. It was his penis. It had been cut off and was nowhere to be found. There's a lot to this story. Viewer discretion is advised. Brigitte Harris was born on the 6th of June 1991 in Staten Island, New York, to parents Eric Goodridge and Lucy Ann Harris, who immigrated from Liberia to the United States. Eric had several businesses, including an import-export company, a record store, and a travel agency. Lucy already had 2 children and went on to have 4 more with Eric. However, when Brigitte was born, Eric denied she was his child. Eric was no longer satisfied with his home life and eventually left the family for another woman. Lucy, now left with 6 children, struggled to raise them alone. And in 1983, when Brigitte was just 2 years old, Lucy left her 6 children and returned to Liberia to attend her grandfather's funeral. However, as she didn't have a green card or citizenship, and despite leaving 6 children behind, she was not allowed to return to the US. The 6 children bounced around from foster home to foster home. Brigitte and her siblings eventually moved in with her father and his wife. However, in 1990, Eric took a temporary job back in Liberia, which extended for several months. Eric's wife grew tired of him and filed for a divorce. The children were sent to live with their aunt, Eric's sister, and grandma, Eric's mum, in Providence, Rhode Island. Brigitte's grandma was described as mean and hateful and didn't have an ounce of love in her body. She showed favoritism and treated them like slaves, while her cousins sat around doing nothing and would beat them severely for the slightest thing. On one occasion, someone had forgot to flush a toilet and left a big turd floating, which Brigitte got the blame for. Brigitte's grandmother went berserk, grabbed Brigitte by the collar and stripped her naked. Brigitte had no idea why she was in trouble. Whilst her cousins watched, her grandmother took a stick and beat her so hard it split her skin. You would think that was enough. However, her grandmother wasn't satisfied with beating and bruising Brigitte. She went on to tell Brigitte to bend over and poured red pepper sauce into her butt, then continued to cover every part of her split skin in pepper sauce. On another occasion, her grandmother, again angry with Brigitte, threw a phone and hit Brigitte in the mouth and broke her front tooth. When she took Brigitte to the hospital, she told her to tell the nurses she had fallen off her bike. In February 1994, at the age of 12, Brigitte and her siblings went back to Liberia and reunited with their mother. Brigitte was excited to meet her mother, as she believed she would now receive genuine love and acceptance. However, she couldn't have been more wrong. After about 2 weeks, Brigitte and her siblings began to feel ignored. Brigitte soon came to the realization that her mother didn't care. Brigitte contracted malaria and was in hospital for 2 weeks. Her mother didn't visit her, as she said she had a church revival to attend. Once again, her mother abandoned her, and Brigitte was again living with relatives. However, living in Liberia was a culture shock for her and her siblings, as Liberia was going through a civil war that worsened in 1996. Somehow, Bridget's mother got documents proving her children were American citizens and they were airlifted back to the US. Once back in the US, Brigitte again bounced around from relative to relative and ended up in a women's shelter. She also traveled back and forth between Liberia and the US. Eventually, in 2007, Brigitte finally found a place of her own with no one to answer to. She had made new friends and was working as a security guard in JF Kennedy Airport and was no longer in contact with her father. However, not long after moving into her apartment, her father, Eric, called. Brigitte had no interest in talking to him and told him to lose her number. Eric's health was failing, and in June of 2007, he returned to the US to seek better medical treatment. His daughter Carleen allowed him to stay with her. Brigitte wasn't happy that her father was now living with her sister. Carleen tried to convince Brigitte to forgive their father as he was trying to make amends. Although Eric was a well-respected entrepreneur in his community, behind closed doors, Eric was a monster. He had put Brigitte through years of rape and sex. He would pretend to play games with her by bouncing her on his knees, then go on to perform acts that no 3-year-old should ever have to go through. This animal first penetrated his daughter Brigitte at the age of 3. Then at the age of 4, he forced her to perform acts on him. The abuse continued throughout her childhood and into her teens, becoming more and more violent over the years. On one occasion, while Brigitte was in Liberia, he hid her passport so she couldn't leave and refused to return it. Brigitte told her mother what Eric had been doing to her for years. Lucy decided to tell a pastor that Eric had been in her daughter, but nothing was done. This God-fearing man, this pastor, looked the other way and suddenly became unavailable due to his busy pastoral commitments. Eric was a well-respected businessman. They didn't want to believe that he was a monster. She bravely fought him off the last time he tried to rape her. Whilst fighting him off, he dared to ask Brigitte what was wrong. Brigitte, now older, left Liberia for the last time and distanced herself from her father. However, she did feel some remorse as she had left her younger sister behind and knew he was her. She also suspected Carleen had been However, when Brigitte talked about it, Carleen would change the subject. But now he was back in the US and wanted to make amends. Brigitte's sister Carleen invited her for a family dinner and told her her father would be there and that he wanted to apologize. Brigitte agreed to attend the family dinner and took a 2-hour subway and ferry ride to Carleen's home in Staten Island. Brigitte arrived. This was the first time she had seen Eric in years, and she was immediately angered by what she saw. Eric was bouncing her niece on his leg just like he used to do to her as a child. Not only did she find that disturbing, but her father announced that he wanted to take Carleen's daughter back to Liberia. This triggered Brigitte. She was furious. She couldn't let this happen. She loved her nieces and refused to let what's happened to her as a child happen to them. Brigitte and her sister argued. She didn't trust Eric and couldn't understand why Carleen would agree to such a thing. However, in Carlene's mind, he was an old, sick man and didn't believe he would do what he had done to them growing up. Bridgette's mind was now flooded with flashbacks of an abuse she had suffered by Eric and other relatives. He had to be stopped. Brigitte wanted to go to the police and report what Eric had done to her. However, the statute of limitations had passed. She searched the web for a solution and came across the case of Lorena Bobbitt, a woman who had cut off her husband's penis as she claimed he had abused her for years. Brigitte knew what she had to do to stop Eric. On Wednesday, the 25th of July, 3 days before she would see her father again, Brigitte set up a camcorder, aimed it at herself and started recording. She said, "My name is Brigitte Harris, and this is the story of my life. Well, not the whole thing. It will take too long. Just the summary reasons. Why I'm doing what I'm about to do. Why I feel I have to do it. Why it must be done. Why I've waited this long to do it. And so you can judge me. But before you do, get the whole story. That's all I ask." A few days later, Brigitte invited her father to her apartment. She wanted to talk to him about the years of abuse he had put her through. She wanted him to know that what he did to her was not okay. As a child, Eric had always tried to convince her that what he was doing was normal. And this is what all fathers do to their daughters. Brigitte told him she remembered the first time he hit her. His response was, "How do you even remember that when you were only 3 years old?" Sick fuck. Brigitte began to get angry. He didn't appear shocked by what she said and didn't deny it. Brigitte also spoke about when he forced her to have at the age of 4. Eric began to make excuses and was not admitting to what he had done, which was pissing Brigitte off. She eventually told him that she had invited him to her apartment to ask him not to take her nieces to Liberia. She told him she knew his intention and he needed to stop. And since he wanted to make amends, here was his chance. However, Eric denied ever doing anything wrong. Brigitte was now in a rage and screaming at him, calling him a liar and telling him that he knew what he had done. Brigitte realized that he was not going to change and knew her nieces were in danger. She was going to stop him one way or another. She was going to take away his weapon, and that weapon was his penis. Brigitte was going to ensure he would never hurt a little girl again. Eric got up and took a step towards her. Brigitte pulled out her pepper spray and sprayed him in the eyes. They fought and fell on the floor. Somehow, Eric passes out. She looked for a way to restrain him. She found some handcuffs, a novelty she had bought after her friends teased her about her job as a rent-a-cop. She put them on him and noticed he was having trouble breathing. She was in a total panic now, scrambling for a way to revive him. She splashed him with some water and started calling his name. He woke up and started screaming. She decided she had to gag him. She got a towel, stuffed it in his mouth and wrapped duct tape around his head to secure it, leaving large holes so he could breathe. Brigitte pulled down his pants. She used scissors at first. When they didn't work, she looked for the scalpels she had purchased from eBay about a month ago. To keep him still, she pressed her knee on his windpipe. One cut was enough. To her surprise, there wasn't much blood. Brigitte knew that the doctors would try to reattach it if found, and she didn't want that to happen. She brought her father's penis to the stove and turned on the flames. The smell of burning flesh brought Brigitte back to reality. She turned the stove off, put the burnt organ in a paper towel and called 911, but hung up as she realized she had to leave the apartment first. She picked up the scalpels, pepper spray, scissors, and pills and put them in her backpack, left the apartment, and then called the police. Once again, Brigitte hangs up before providing the 911 operator with further information. Police and paramedics arrive and perform CPR, but it was too late. Eric was pronounced dead at the scene. Upon further inspection, they found that Eric's had been cut off. A scalpel was located next to the body, which was determined to be the weapon used. This was not the cause of Eric's death. Eric had been gagged with a towel secured with duct tape, exposing his nose and eyes. However, the gagging reflex little by little grabbed the towel to the back of his throat, which cut off the airway to his nostrils. The cause of death was asphyxiation. 2 notes were also discovered at the crime scene. One said, "He wrecked my life." And the other said, "At first I blamed myself. Now I know it's not my fault." Once again, 911 dispatchers called Brigitte and informed her that they needed her to come to the police station. Brigitte agreed and told them she was a block away, but didn't show up. Instead, Brigitte walked past the police station towards the Boardwalk Pier and threw away the... She called her sister to tell her what she had done and that she was about to hand herself over to the police. Carlene told her not to go to the police as she feared she would never see her again. Carlene immediately stopped what she was doing and went to meet her sister. When she arrived, Brigitte was in a daze. Carlene reached for her sister's hand and noticed blood covering both hands and her lap. Brigitte had used a scalpel to cut her wrist. Carlene immediately called 911, and Brigitte was admitted into Richmond University Medical Center psychiatric ward for 3 weeks and then placed under arrest. Within 36 hours of the murder, Carlene had hired star defense attorney Arthur Adela. She told the world that both she and Brigitte had been victims of a father who had regularly and repeatedly both of them from a very young age.
She got revenge by cutting off his genitals and murdering him. Tonight, the other sister, Carlene Goodridge, is taking a brave stand against her dead father.
Monstrous, man.
Preyed upon her, a charge Harris's sister says she knows is true because she also suffered a childhood of being by her father.
After all these years, the only reason I can talk about this now is because it's going to help my sister. She needs help. Myself, it started at about 4 years old till I was about 12 years old. For my sister, probably about 3 years old. Till she was going on 18. Till she was going on 18. This was
A sister breaking her silence today in a bizarre case of family revenge, a case that isn't what it seemed.
Sadly, she dealt with this for so long by herself when I was right there. And I went through the same darn thing with her and did nothing.
What the evidence is going to reveal here is that Brigitte Harris was the victim of regular and systematic and by her father from the age of 3 years old right through young adulthood.
Do you think she just broke down?
We all break down. Of course you break down with something like this. We broke down a long time ago. At this point, her cries are loud and clear. Yeah. She needs mental help. She needs to be heard. She needs to finally deal with, in a healthy way, what she's gone through.
Anyone who's been involved in the criminal justice system, as long as I have, and anyone's a New York City person, you could tell that she's someone who's calling out for help.
And as the case will soon be heard by the courts, her lawyer wants to make one thing clear.
Her father was a monster, and living with a monster from the age of 3 is something that you just don't recover from without professional help.
However, some family members publicly refuted claims of abuse and disowned Brigitte and other family members who communicated with her.
As they left court, Harris's family cast doubt that her father abused her.
I don't think her father molested her. Even if he molested her, she had all rights, all many years to get up and do something about it or say something.
2 years after her arraignment for second-degree murder, Brigitte went to trial in September 2009. Testifying in her own defense, Brigitte stated that she had researched the 1993 castration case of John and Lorena Bobbitt. Brigitte argued that her motive for the killing was not revenge, but to take away his weapon, an act to prevent Eric from taking his grandchildren to Liberia and most likely them. However, prosecutors maintained that Brigitte's actions towards her father showed premeditation. On the 30th of September 2009, the jury found Brigitte guilty of the lesser included offence of second-degree manslaughter. One juror reported, "None of us felt that she deserved to get any murder charges, so we decided on second-degree manslaughter." Despite receiving letters from 7 of the jurors asking him to give her no more jail time, mean old Queens Supreme Court Judge Arthur Cooperman sentenced Brigitte to a maximum of 5 to 15 years in prison.
She was tortured. She was beaten until she had open wounds, and her family made her get red hot pepper and stick it in the wounds, stick it in every orifice of her body. You know, they say you do the crime, you have to do the time. Unfortunately for Brigitte, it was the other way around. She's been doing time until she did the crime.
A sympathetic jury convicted Harris of manslaughter, but they urged the judge to show leniency given the horrific past they heard on the stand. On Friday, the judge sentenced her to 5 to 15 years. With 27 months already spent behind bars, she'll be eligible for parole in about a year.
I am very upset about it. I felt she should be left free. I felt like she had enough. She's been abused all her life, and it's time for her to be able to get a fair share in life.
In a nearly unprecedented move, the same jurors pleaded for leniency. George Sarakis is one of them.
She's not a threat to society that needs to be kept in prison.
Charles Marshall, another.
If there's anyone who needs something good to happen to her in her life, it is Miss Harris.
Most who wrote letters to the judge were moved by what happened before the crime.
This young woman has been through a great deal.
I remembered the doll that I had.
Keep in mind the horrible things that she has been through.
I was wearing these like daisy printed underwear of yellow flowers.
It began at the age of 3.
It was constant abuse, whether physical or sexual.
Years of torture, years of abuse, she says, at the hands of her father.
I would get hit with anything from canes to fists, belts.
A number of people called him a monster.
Yeah.
Would you call him that?
That's a pretty accurate description. It was always pain and loneliness, always wanting to run away, never having the courage to run away.
Consider giving Brigitte Harris the lowest possible sentence.
Judge, please be lenient.
8 jurors wrote letters on her behalf. 4 attended the sentencing. Her lawyer moved as well, handled her case for free.
Their reaction immediately after the verdict, they surrounded me on the courthouse steps and just said, please make sure Brigitte gets the help she needs from a psychological point of view. And I said, fine, I will when she gets out of jail. And they were very surprised that she was going to go to jail. And they volunteered to do whatever they could to prevent that from happening.
Now they've kept their word to help her to be released from prison as early as the law will allow.
She made her mistake.
The stuff she had went through all her life from a little girl, I just figured she needed a break in life.
I just wanted to help her. I mean, throughout her life, she hasn't really had anyone that helped her, so.
Miss Harris just needs a chance to start over.
Looking back now, knowing what you're facing, hard time, would you have done this?
It's not something that obviously was rational thinking, and no, I would find other means of trying to bring him to justice.
Still, her belief stands. If not stopped, abuse will go on.
If he's done it to you, he's going to do it to someone else.
Brigitte Harris tells me she decided to take the violent action after seeing her father with her young nieces on his lap. She says she believed he was planning to move the children out of the country to live with him and just wouldn't let that happen. Christine.
As far as early as the law will allow, when is the soonest she could possibly be released?
With time served in about 2 years. She'll be before the parole board.
After serving 3 years, she was released on parole on the 13th of August, 2012. Since her release, Brigitte has worked with the advocacy group Steps to End Family Violence. She also worked for DoorDash delivering food on her bike and volunteered for an organization called Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, where she picks up leftover food from restaurants and bakeries and delivers it to homeless shelters and food pantries around the city. In a letter, Brigitte wrote, "I know second chances don't come easy, and not everyone thinks I should have one. There are family members and friends that no longer speak to me. There are strangers that are scared of me, and in society, there's a lot of rejection. I went back and forth with Amazon for a month, applying for a job delivering groceries. After I provided recommendations and told them my side of the story, they sent me a letter telling me they could not hire me. New York City wouldn't even give me a job picking up garbage and cleaning graffiti during the pandemic. All the rejection is frustrating and discouraging. It feels as though even though I've paid my debt to society and did my time, the world continues to punish me. But even if the same happens to you, keep pushing forward. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it happen. I will get my second chance at life, my second chance at happiness, and you can too. If someone abuses you, let go of the guilt. As a child, abuse is so hard to process and understand. But what I want you to know, it is not your fault.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. I already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long.